We got to the lake house just before sunset. The kind of place that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 90s wooden porch. Chipped paint. Faint smell of something between mildew and sunscreen. Travis was already unloading the car, humming to himself, and I just stood there for a minute, trying to shake off the city and whatever it was I'd been carrying with me lately. Mason and Aubrey should be here around 7, Travis said without looking up, like it was just a regular visit. Like Mason wasn't the person I hadn't thought about in a long time but also somehow always had. While I unpacked, I found an old pack of mint gum in my coat pocket, and before I could think, I had a piece in my mouth. The taste hit harder than expected. Memories of late nights, shared glances, and a version of myself I thought I'd outgrown. Travis glanced over and raised an eyebrow. Didn't you used to hate that flavor? I just shrugged and said, guess I forgot. Later that evening, Mason strummed the guitar he found in the corner while we all sat on the porch, laughing over stories that didn't quite feel like mine anymore. Then he looked at me and said, you still write yourself letters? And I dropped my glass. The next morning, the air was heavy with the smell of pine and something sweet from the kitchen that Aubrey had made. Before leaving with Travis to explore the nearby park trails, I stayed behind, claiming I wanted to read. Though the book never opened, Mason found me out by the old sauna, a sagging wooden structure that barely kept heat, but we sat inside anyway, letting the warm air creep in slowly. Conversation came easy, the way it does when there's too much history to pretend it doesn't matter, and somewhere between jokes about the past and comments on how strange it felt to be back in each other's orbit, he looked at me and said, almost carelessly, you still look at me like you did back in Savannah. I didn't know what to do with the quiet that followed, but he didn't wait. He leaned in, not hesitating, like the years hadn't passed at all. And the kiss happened before I even had time to doubt it. It was clumsy, off balance, and way too loaded with everything we weren't saying, and when we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Later that day, Travis asked Mason and me to drive into town and pick up a few things for dinner: wine, bread, something for dessert, and I said sure before I had time to think it through. The drive was quiet. The kind of quiet that fills up fast when there's too much sitting underneath it. And we didn't try to fix it with conversation. Music played low from the radio. Some old indie band we both used to listen to without ever agreeing on whether they were actually good. When we stopped at the store, Mason grabbed a drink I hadn't touched in years: peach iced tea. The kind I used to keep in my fridge when I lived alone. He handed it to me without a word, like he just knew, and I took it without asking why. On the drive back, we still didn't talk. At dinner, Travis asked who bought the tea, and without thinking, I said it was me, alone. I don't know why I lied exactly, but I felt the words settle too easily, like I'd done it before. And maybe I had. That night, we all went out on the lake, just the 4 of us in a little metal boat with weak lanterns and a cooler of beer that no one really touched. The water was still, reflecting the moonlight in that way that made everything look softer than it felt. Aubrey talked the most, telling stories about her job, her travels, her childhood, all with the kind of enthusiasm that made it hard to tell if she believed her own version or just wanted us to. Mason stayed quiet, eyes on the water, barely reacting, until at some point he looked up and said, not loudly but clear enough, you know, she's not as honest as she seems. And then he looked straight at me. Just for a second, no one reacted. Or maybe no one knew how. I couldn't tell if he was talking about Aubrey or me, or if he even cared who understood. The boat felt smaller after that, like we were all playing some game we never agreed to join, and I wasn't sure anymore who was bluffing. The storm came in fast, with wind that rattled the windows and lightning that lit up the trees like flashbulbs. By midnight, the power was out, and the house had gone still in that strange way only a blackout can make it. No hum of the fridge, no distant music, just the creak of the wood and the occasional roll of thunder. Everyone was asleep or pretending to be. I went to the kitchen to get water, half expecting to be alone, but Mason was already there, barefoot, sitting at the table with a mug of tea, staring into the dark like it had something to say. I didn't speak right away, and neither did he. Eventually, without looking at me, he said, you've been pretending for too long that everything's under control. There was no accusation in his voice, just quiet observation, like he'd been waiting to say it. I sat down across from him, and somehow the silence between us didn't feel empty when we kissed this time. It wasn't rushed or confused. It was slow, deliberate, and terrifying in a way I couldn't explain, not because it felt wrong, but because it did. Single quotes. The next evening we went out to the bar by the lake, the one with the string lights and old jukebox that played more static than music. The place was loud but loose, full of strangers who didn't care who we were or what we were trying to hold together. Aubrey was already chatting up the bartender before we even sat down, laughing too hard at jokes that didn't land, touching his arm just enough to be noticed. Travis didn't say a word about it, just sipped his drink and watched her with a calm I couldn't understand. At one point, he turned to me and said, almost gently, "I'm lucky you're not like her." I couldn't look at him. I smiled. Because I had to, but something inside me cracked, sharp and quiet. He didn't know. He was sitting there, trusting me completely. And I felt the weight of that trust in a way I hadn't before. I wanted to reach for it, hold onto it, fix something I couldn't name. But instead I just nodded and finished my drink, wishing I could feel clean again. The next morning I wandered out to the old shed behind the house, looking for something, maybe space, maybe quiet, maybe just a reason to be alone inside. Everything was dust-covered and forgotten, tangled fishing lines, broken chairs, and a box marked with someone's faded handwriting. I opened it without thinking and found old postcards, bits of string, bottle caps, and near the bottom, a yellowed envelope with my handwriting on it. I didn't remember writing it, but it was definitely mine, a draft of a letter I must have meant to send Mason after college. The words were raw, unfinished, and too honest. I was still holding it when he came in, stopping short when he saw what I had. For a second neither of us said anything, then everything came at once: questions, frustration, years of silence crashing out in a mess of voices. We weren't careful. We weren't quiet. Aubrey must have heard from outside, because later, she found me on the porch, looked straight at me, and said with surprising calm, "So you're one of us after all." That evening, Travis set the table like we were celebrating something: candles, cloth napkins, even a playlist humming from his phone like it was date night back home. I watched him move through the kitchen with purpose, trying not to look tired, trying to hold something together I hadn't realized was already slipping. After dinner, he pulled out an envelope, handed it to me with a small smile, and said, "To tickets to Vermont. Just you and me, no phones, no work, just quiet." His voice was soft, steady, like he was offering a way back to something that might still be possible. I wanted to say no, I wanted to tell the truth, all of it, but instead I smiled and said it sounded perfect. I could feel the lie the moment it left my mouth, not sharp but heavy. Travis looked relieved, hopeful even, and I hated that I couldn't give him more than a performance. Deep down, I knew he was trying to fix something he didn't understand, had already broken. Vermont was quiet in that way that made everything feel louder inside your own head. The snow had started early, blanketing the trees and softening the world until it barely felt real. We stayed in a cabin that smelled like pine and old books, and for a few days, we tried to be okay. We cooked, walked through the woods, lit fires. We didn't need just to have something to do, but nothing felt solid. One morning, while brushing my teeth, I paused and stared at myself in the mirror longer than usual. Something was different, off in a way I couldn't explain. I knew before I checked. The test only confirmed what my body already felt. I sat on the edge of the tub with shaking hands, staring at the little pink line like it could give me answers. By timing, it could go either way. When I told Travis, he looked at me with something close to joy and then quietly asked, "Are you being honest with me?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I just looked at him, and the silence said enough. We got back home just as the snow started melting, the streets wet and quiet, everything looking exactly the same while nothing felt familiar anymore. I unpacked slowly, folding sweaters I didn't want to wear, placing things back in drawers that suddenly felt like someone else's. Outside, the garden was still half frozen, patches of ice clinging to the dirt, but I sat there anyway, wrapped in a blanket, holding the letter Mason had left before we all drove away from the lake. Just a torn piece of notebook paper, folded once, with 3 words written in his rushed, uneven handwriting: "Don't wait forever."